great pleasure and great honor for me to welcome our distinguished visitor, President of Pakistan. We are glad to have you here because you come as the head of an important and powerful country, which is allied with us in CETO, which is associated with us in CENTO, which represents a powerful force for freedom in your area of the world.
That was the voice of President Kennedy that you just heard. He was welcoming the President of Pakistan to the US in 1961. The US and Pakistan were now the best of friends. How did that happen? Welcome to part 2 of our 3-part podcast series on the origins of the Kashmir conflict. It's been the longest running soap opera between India and Pakistan. For listeners, if you're new here, we left our story on the origins of the Kashmir conflict in part 1 with what happened after India and Pakistan became independent in 1947. Now, just like in any messy divorce, both sides fought, both wanted Kashmir. At some point, India decided that it was going to put down its arms and request the United Nations to intervene. No surprises there because nothing useful came out of it. If you'd like to hear the story of the origins of this conflict from the very beginning, please listen to part 1. The link to this is in the show notes below. I started this story by telling you all how the United States and Pakistan had become great friends. How did that happen? The story begins on a warm sunny day in faraway United States. The year was 1954. The president was then Eisenhower. He was sitting in his chair. He was quite uncomfortable, not with his chair, but with the idea of the Soviet Union growing in power. Now, he wanted to build a strong group of countries who would all come together and stop the Soviet Union from expanding. He'd already got a bunch of countries to agree that they would all stand together, hold hands, that sort of stuff. These countries included Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. If you'd like to pause this episode at this point, you can do that and quickly take a look at the world map or a globe. You will notice that Pakistan is not too far from these countries. So he felt, by he I meant President Eisenhower, he felt that it would be great to get Pakistan also to join this alliance because it is not too far from the Soviet Union. And because of its geographical position, America really wanted Pakistan to join this group huddle, which would later be called the Baghdad Pact. So to win Pakistan over, President Eisenhower invited Pakistan's Prime Minister Bogra for dinner one day. And he started talking about, Bogra, we've got to fight communism. We shouldn't let them grow in power. It's a great threat, blah, blah, blah. Bogra was no fool. He knew exactly what the United States wanted. So Bogra just leaned in and said, well, Mr. President, tell me what's in it for us. So Eisenhower said, I'll tell you what, I'll send you some of our powerful fighter jets. I'll send you some fancy military equipment and lots of money. That was good enough for Bogra. So the dinner ended. Bogra was back home and a new era began for Pakistan. Billions and billions of dollars in money and military equipment began to flow into Pakistan, but a lot of it really went into building Pakistan's armed forces. Because someday Pakistan really wanted to get back Kashmir.
आज मैं पूछना चाहता हूं जो 15 लाख कश्मीरी तुम्हारे दस्त इख्तियार में हैं, आपने उनको हक शुजाइयत दे दिया? क्या आपने उनको ये आजादी दी जो अपनी किस्मत जिस तरह चाहे बनाए? तब मैं समझता कि हाँ, पाकिस्तान जो कहता है वो करके दिखाता है। नहीं, ये बात नहीं है। मैं जानता हूं तुम्हें कश्मीर के लोगों की जरूरत नहीं है, तुम्हें कश्मीर के जंगलों की जरूरत है, तुम्हें कश्मीर के पानी की जरूरत है, तुम्हें कश्मीर की खूबसूरत फिजाओं की जरूरत है। तुम उसी तरह कश्मीर के साथ सलूक करना चाहते हो जिस तरह माजी में और लोगों ने उसके साथ सलूक किया और उसको अपना ऐशगाह समझा। हम दोस्त और दुश्मन को पहचानते हैं, हम जानते हैं कि किसकी क्या नीयत है।
Now, we left off part 1 with Sheikh Abdullah, who was a dear friend of Prime Minister Pandit Nehru, taking up leadership of the state, rallying the people of Jammu and Kashmir together, and helping the state of India fight the tribal groups who had descended from Pakistan. Now, in this audio, where you just heard him address a rally, he declares that Pakistan does not really want the people of Kashmir. Pakistan only wants the lands, the forests, and the waters of the state. Now, it's quite evident when you hear this speech that Sheikh Abdullah was not a great friend of Pakistan. So, the Sheikh really had only one option left to him, and that was to join the Indian government. Here, he negotiated quite hard and he sought extraordinary terms for his state. Now, remember, by 1950, around the time when all of this was happening, the Indian government had already passed a constitution. All other states had agreed to abide by the same set of rules and laws. But when the Sheikh went and he said, okay, I'm willing to join the Indian Union, but I want special privileges for Jammu and Kashmir. He wanted his state to have its own flag. The Indian government was certainly allowed to decide on issues related to defense and foreign affairs, but on everything else, he said, the state of Jammu and Kashmir would have its own laws, it would have its own constitution. It was not going to abide by the laws enshrined in the Indian constitution. Also, the Sheikh went so far ahead to say, when the leader for the state of Jammu and Kashmir is elected, he shall be called the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Whereas in rest of India, when a leader is elected for a state, he or she is called a Chief Minister. Well, when Nehru heard all of these demands, he and his government, they were completely taken aback. They hadn't made such concessions to any other state. But Kashmir was critical for India. Now, once again, if you'd like to go ahead and take a look at the world map, and if you look at where Kashmir is, you'll understand that a lot of its importance comes from where it is located, its geography. So, Kashmir has Pakistan to one side, of course. It is not too far from the Soviet Union. It is also not too far from what would later become China on the other side. In 1950, it was Tibet, later it would become China, and of course, it borders the rest of India too. So, its geography gave it a tremendous amount of importance. So, the Indian government agreed to all of these terms that Sheikh Abdullah asked for, and these are the terms that later would be called Article 370. These terms were placed under Part 21 of the Indian Constitution under a title called Temporary, Transitional and Special Provisions. So once the government agreed, Jammu and Kashmir was now formally a part of India, and in true spirit of democracy, elections were held in the state. Sheikh Abdullah's political party won the election. He became the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. This is how things stood in Jammu and Kashmir. A little bit of unrest, not too much agitation. There wasn't any call for Jammu and Kashmir to become an independent country. And things flowed like this until Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru passed away in 1964. India now had a new Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri. Now I come to the year 1965 and we move our story to Pakistan. The country was broadly happy. People were of course thrilled because a lot of money was flowing in. The leaders of Pakistan were even more thrilled because There were a lot of fancy American bombers and military equipment that was there right there in their backyard. At this time, President Ayub Khan of Pakistan met India's new Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. Now, while I was researching for this story, I came across a very interesting photograph. It's a photo of Ayub Khan standing right next to Shastri. Now, Ayub Khan, you can see in his photo, he's standing 6 feet 2 inches, well-built, tall person, dressed in a fancy 3-piece suit. Next to him is Lal Bahadur Shastri. He's all of 5 feet and 2 inches tall. He's dressed in a simple homespun cotton attire with a Gandhian cap and a dhoti. So after Lal Bahadur Shastri had left, Ayub Khan turned around and told one of his friends, "So this is the man who's now the Prime Minister of India? The man who has succeeded Nehru?" Ayub Khan rubbed his hands in glee. He had all these fancy military equipments come all the way from the US, and he thought this Lal Bahadur Shastri, no, this man, he's not likely to be able to do much. Now is the time for us to go and take back all of Jammu and Kashmir. So the Pakistan army and the state of Pakistan trained a few people, sent them across the border, gave them some military weapons, and they were supposed to throw bombs at government institutions and generally create an atmosphere of fear. Pakistan's hope was that in all of this, the people of Kashmir would be so upset with the way India had handled all this chaos that they would join the Pakistani army whenever a war would break up, and they would fight against India. Except that is not what happened. The Kashmiris, who largely united, stood shoulder to shoulder with the Indian army. On another front, Lal Bahadur Shastri, who he thought was a man short of stature and could do very little, he was swift to take decisions, and tough decisions at that, and that really helped the Indian armed forces move faster and better.
तो वही असली नारा है आज देश की जरूरत के मुताबिक, एक तो जय जवान का और दूसरा जय किसान का। ये दो नारे मैं समझता हूँ कि आज हमारे देश के लिए जरूरी है, एक जय जवान और एक जय किसान, और फिर उसी से सारे देश का एक जय हिंद का नारा लगता है।
And that is the voice of Lal Bahadur Shastri as he addressed a public meeting in the middle of this war with Pakistan in 1965, where he told all these people, "Come on, we've got to rally behind our army as well as our farmers who feed us." And Pakistan's armed forces could not make much headway in the war. When all of this fighting was happening, the two big brothers in the world, United States and Russia, immediately stepped in and they said, "Okay guys, enough is enough, stop fighting." And so the two countries stopped fighting. Now, if you read Ramachandra Guha's India After Gandhi, you will see that he characterizes this war as a draw, because of course nobody really won or lost anything here. But both countries went back and declared to their respective public that they had won the war. Now, personally to me, I find it a little odd for Pakistan to say that it had won, because the war had been initiated with the aim of annexing Kashmir, and that had not happened. Now, around this time, how was the rest of the world viewing what was going on in India and Pakistan? BBC issued a report and it said, India's Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri is a Hindu and that's why he's ready for war with Pakistan. When Lal Bahadur Shastri read this, he wasn't impressed by this characterization of what India stood for by the Western media. So soon after this, he addressed a very large public meeting, a meeting of a large number of people in India, and he made a speech. I'm going to read aloud an excerpt of his speech here. I really wish that I could find a recording of Lal Bahadur Shastri saying all of this in his own words. Unfortunately, I don't have one, but I only have a transcript of what he spoke, so bear with me, you'll have to hear them through my voice. So he addressed, "While I am a Hindu, Mir Mushtaq, who is presiding this meeting, he's a Muslim. Mr. Frank Anthony, who has just addressed you, he is a Christian. There are Sikhs and Parsis in India. Now, the unique thing about our country is that we have people of different religions. We have temples, we have mosques, we have gurudwaras and churches. But we don't bring any of these into politics. As far as politics is concerned, each one of us is as much Indian as the other. And that is the difference between India and Pakistan. Lal Bahadur Shastri did not live too long. A man of his stature should have lived longer. He signed a ceasefire treaty with Pakistan one afternoon and he died the same night. The issues of Jammu and Kashmir remained just as they were in 1947. Nothing much changed until 1979, the year when Pakistan won its biggest lottery. And what lottery was that? The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The US wanted the Soviets out. So what does the US do? Well, they send billions of dollars to Pakistan in military equipment and in money. Pakistan was to train militant groups in Afghanistan who would fight the Soviets. The next 10 years were golden years for Pakistan. They used their money and military equipment for two purposes. One, of course, was to train local fighting forces in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. And the second, they also kept sending a few fighters to Kashmir and to destabilize Kashmir. So this started in the early 1980s. The 1980s were not just a bad decade for Afghanistan, it was a terrible decade for Kashmir too. Everyday life was uncertain for people living there. Bombs would blast anywhere. People walking around would not know when and where the next attack would happen. Through all of this, the United States kept its support and money flowing to Pakistan. They turned a blind eye to what was happening in Kashmir. All they cared about was stopping the Soviets from gaining power. The chaos in Kashmir was a byproduct that they could conveniently choose to ignore.
नमस्कार, इस बुलेटिन के मुख्य समाचार। प्रधानमंत्री ने कहा है कि सरकार जम्मू कश्मीर में चुनाव कराने के लिए वहां की स्थिति की फिर से समीक्षा कर रही है। डॉक्टर मुरली मनोहर जोशी ने कल लाजपत नगर में हुए बम विस्फोट की घटना को पाकिस्तानी एजेंटों की करतूत बताते हुए इसकी कड़ी निंदा की है। For more than 60 years since India's independence, the country has faced grave security challenges, from wars with China and Pakistan to dealing with brutal forms of terrorism. Someone who has directly handled the responsibility of managing India's security has been former External Affairs Minister Jaswant Singh. In his new book, India at Risk, Mr. Singh writes about the enormous challenges that India has faced, including some of its very own, such as the hijacking of IC-814 to Kandahar, the Kargil War, and Operation Parakram against Pakistan.
What you just heard were some of the news reports that played on Doordarshan, which was then India's only news channel. Reports of terrorist incidents and bomb blasts in Jammu and Kashmir as well as elsewhere in India. The Afghan war came to an end in 1989. The Soviets were defeated. Life for Kashmiris was about to become worse. Think of Pakistan. Now, it was a country which had trained hundreds and thousands of fighters for what was a holy war, a jihad, call for Islam to rise. And all of these were young men, spirited and all ready to fight for some great cause. Plus, the leaders of Pakistan were still hoping that someday they would win Kashmir back. So if you put these two together, Think about what Pakistan would do with all these young men raring to fight. All eyes turned to Kashmir. So thousands of these trained men began entering the Kashmir Valley soon after the Afghan war ended. Now, at first, all they did was a few small scale attacks. They would throw grenades in front of a government installation or a police post. Gradually, they started to recruit hundreds of local Kashmiri youth. They asked them to join their fight and they gave them training in weapons so they would liberate Kashmir from India and eventually perhaps join Pakistan. They also grew more and more daring in their attacks. They began killing people, they began killing government officials, military officers, and even journalists. When these new bunch of terror groups who had earlier fought in Afghanistan came to Kashmir, they changed the nature of the fight and the war. See, up until then, all of Jammu and Kashmir was supposed to be just fighting for it to become independent. Azadi was supposed to be their end goal. Azadi means freedom. But when these new terror groups came in, they said now we have to fight for jihad. Jihad is a holy war for Islam to rise. Kashmiri society now began to break up. The Hindus living in Kashmir, they were called Pandits. They began to be killed in large numbers. The killings were so appalling that the Pandits fled the state and they relocated to many other parts of India. And to this day, as I record this in 2025, Kashmiri Pandits are fearful of going back to their homes. Now, up until now, all that I have narrated to you was money that was flowing into Pakistan from the United States and other Western countries because of the Cold War that was going on between the Soviet Union and the West. This Cold War came to an end in the 1990s. Soviet Union broke up. The United States had extracted its pound of flesh. Kashmir, however, had lost much more than that in this fight. The support that the United States gave for Pakistan started reducing in amounts, but it still continued. Up until 2011, when the United States discovered, oh my God, I thought Pakistan was our friend, except, surprise, surprise, Pakistan is protecting the leader of Al-Qaeda in its own country. The leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, he had masterminded a terrorist attack on the United States. It was a 9/11 attack, and in 2011, Osama bin Laden was taken out by the US forces from Pakistan's territory. By 2018, the US formally suspended their annual aid to Pakistan, and Trump even famously tweeted, "We have foolishly given Pakistan $33 billion. They take our money and they lie." Both India and Pakistan were born in August of 1947. India's leaders were focused on rebuilding the country through economic growth, but things did not work out too well for them in the first couple of decades. Gradually, things began to improve from the 1970s, and the 1990s onwards, it was a period of fast-paced growth. Since then, India has been growing at 7 to nearly 9% per annum and is one of the faster growing major economies in the world today. Pakistan, on the other hand, had a wonderful opportunity to rebuild their country in the same time, especially with all the aid that was flowing in from the West. I would say the Cold War years could have truly transformed their economy. Instead, Pakistan has been growing at a paltry just 2 to 5% in recent years. Not only did the people of Kashmir suffer during the Cold War years, but so did the people of Pakistan. A golden era for their society to transform has been lost, all thanks to their state's fascination for regaining Kashmir. Coming soon is the third and the final part of the Kashmir conflict. Now that the dust has settled, have things changed since 2011 for Kashmir?